call us to order. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not the Student Achievement Committee Chair, nor the Vice Chair, but I am filling in today as Ms. Mahaffey is unavailable. Mr. Swanson, Vice Chair Swanson, will be joining us a little bit later in the day. Today, we have our Student Achievement Committee agenda, which has been circulated. The first item, I will go ahead and ask if committee members have had a chance to review the minutes. And if so, are there any additions or edits? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Ms. Edmonds and a second from Dr. Ng to approve the previous meeting's minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The minutes from the previous meeting have been adopted. So we will move into our first committee item, Empowering Potential. Dr. Wilson-Norman, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. We are very excited to be able to share some of the work that we have going on in our Advanced Learning Services Department. That we want to provide you with an update today on our current AIG performance data, an overview of the structures and supports that we have in place to support our gifted learners, and then to highlight some of the practices and things that we have underway in our Advanced Learning Program. As we begin to think about everything that we do, we want to ensure that it's tied back to our strategic plan. And so when we think about the supports and services that we put in place for our advanced learners, that we want to ensure that we are committed and focused on the instructional core, that our students are receiving their core instruction and we are accelerating from there. That we want to make sure that we're always analyzing our performance data, ensuring that our gifted students are performing at their highest potential as possible, so ensuring that they are continuing to grow over time as well. But we also want to ensure not just the academic pieces of it, but also thinking about how do we commit to family and community engagement, and then supporting all of the content areas. And so at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Sproul Roberts, who will walk us through some of the definitions for AIG.
Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. We just wanted to start off with the state definition for gifted education. So on the screen, you'll see Article 9B. And Article 9B grounds the work of gifted programming in North Carolina. There are three major components of that Article 9B. First, in which students having to be able to perform or the potential to perform at substantially high levels. The second one is students being able to exhibit high performance capabilities. And then the third part of that Article 9B really talks about the requirement for differentiation for our students so that they can excel in academic programming. One of the things that Article 9B really stresses is the fact that outstanding abilities are present in all students, in all cultural groups, across all economic strata. The next part of North Carolina's AIG program, it's grounded in 6 program standards. So these program standards guide the work of every LEA in North Carolina, and they span from student identification to program accountability. Each of these program standards consists of about 4 to 9 substandards, which guides the creation of the AIG plan. Every 3 years, we submit an AIG plan for our county as well as other LEAs. And prior to that, the State Department submits their revised standards to their board, the Board of Education. And that was just done June of 2024. So now I'm going to turn it over to Drew, who will give us a high-level overview of our AIG students.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we wanted to take just a few minutes at the beginning of the presentation, which, by the way, is the first of at least a couple this spring, just to kind of preface. We won't go as deeply today. It's intended to be an overview. I think, as many of you know, we've got a 3-year AIG plan that we're in the midst of working on, and so we'll provide that overview and be back again in front of this group or the full work session at a point in the near future. But we did want to share with you, first and foremost, this is updated data as of this current year. For those board members that have been around a while, you'll note this is an increase. 30,500 or so students have been identified as AIG in our district. This is up, I think, from 5 or 6 years ago, from around 25 to 26,000. So it is an increase of around 14-15% during that time frame, which does exceed the overall enrollment growth of the district during that time frame. That's significant on several fronts, not the least of which I think is our board knows and understands. First of all, that 19% for relative comparison is about 8 percentage points higher than the state average of around 11%. So the typical LEA has around 11% identified as AIG. In Wake County Public School System, we're around 19, and that's up from 15 or 16% of our student population just a few years ago. I'll also note as well, I think as our board knows and understands, for at least the last 20 years, the state of North Carolina does cap funding to districts at 4% of their total ADM for the purposes of AIG funding. So I don't have to explain the math involved in that in terms of the additional challenges that can present. But we share that just for awareness and kind of emphasis, but not necessarily as an excuse or as a barrier that can prevent us from serving our students well. And I think the data will help to bear that out a little bit that we're sharing with you today. So on that front, this next slide is an overview of the college and career composite for specifically our AIG student subgroup population. So essentially, if you can think about those 30 or so thousand students, if we were just looking at their kind of aggregate test scores and percentage and performance, that's the group that we're talking about. And you can see over the last few years, there's been a steady uptick, which, by the way, generally reflects similar trends that we've seen across the state. I think you all know and recognize 2021 was still a little bit of that aberration year where we had more than 10,000 of our students, you may recall, that were still doing full virtual instruction, not fully immersed or out of the pandemic at that point. So really looking at 2022 forward as more of a benchmark than 2021, to be fair. But you can see about 91% of our AIG students are at the college and career readiness benchmark. To be clear, that's essentially a 4 or a 5 on an EOG or an EOC, not the 3 that is the lower benchmark for proficiency. So just wanted to make sure this is the higher bar, as it should be, for these students, many of whom, quite frankly, could probably walk in the classroom door on the first day and sit for an EOG or an EOC and make a proficient score. And so it is important to make sure we're looking at the right metrics. I will note, again, for comparative purposes, this 91% at that CCR mark is roughly 5 percentage points higher as of 2024 than like peers of other AIG subgroup students across the state of North Carolina, which is around 86%. So our students are slightly outperforming their peers, at least when it comes to college and career composite scores as measured by the state of North Carolina. This slide simply breaks it down a little bit further, just again for your reference and awareness. It shows kind of a breakdown at the elementary level and also at the high school level. As you know, at the elementary and middle school levels, they are served through differentiated support provided by an AIG teacher. At the high school level, it's a little bit different. Students, of course, are encouraged to access high-level courses, advanced placement, honors level, international baccalaureate courses aligned to their area of strengths and interests. Although these accelerative opportunities are not exclusively for AIG students, obviously our AIG identified students access those courses at the high school level at a higher rate than their peers. But again, it gives you a little bit of a view of where our students are in terms of their performance against that college and career metric. And I can say that having looked at statewide data at each of the 115 LEAs across the state, our AIG students in Wake County perform as well or better than most districts, including our large district peers across the state of North Carolina, with 1 or 2 notable exceptions. We're right there with the highest performing districts in the state when it comes to this particular subgroup of students. And on that note, and as you know, a metric that's of course important is that percentage that meet that career and college readiness benchmark. I think we all know and understand growth is also an important component to measure as well. I think we would even argue that perhaps even more important for our advanced learners, who again, quite frankly, make a 4 or a 5 on an EOC or an EOG does not necessarily mean that they have met or exceeded their individual growth benchmarks based on their past performance. And so particularly for this subgroup, we feel like it's important to look at this metric. You'll note, again, going back to 2022, this particular subgroup of students, our AIG students, did not meet that state benchmark for meeting growth, even though they might have been 90% college and career ready. Based on the state standard, they did not meet growth as set by the state and compared to their like peers. That has shifted in a positive direction, as you'll see most recently in 2024, where our AIG subgroup population far exceeded their growth benchmark as a subgroup, which essentially means they performed better than their like AIG peers based on their own respective individual data as measured by EVOS in the state of North Carolina in 2024. And we highlight that not to in any way indicate that we've arrived, that all students get exactly what they need every single day. I think we just use this again for comparative purposes and for context, which we feel like is important for the board, obviously, in the community to know and understand. So with that bit of context, I'm going to turn it back over to Lakeisha, who will take us through the core of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Drew. Now we felt that it was important just to kind of outline the refocused work of Advanced Learning Services. We're really proud to know that we have kind of combined the work of AIG in our accelerative practices. And so when we think about advanced learning, it's more than just for AIG identified students, but those students who are accessing those accelerative opportunities. We have been able to outline and reframe and refocus the work of advanced learning to really focus on those accelerative practices as well as our gifted programming, which is in alignment with the state model that you can see on the screen represented by the tree. When you think of the work of advanced learning in Wake County, you can think of it in three main buckets. So policy and practices, academic advancement, and access and opportunity. So when we think about policy and practice, it's really about those guidelines that expand excellence through legislative requirement and district practices. When we think about academic advancement, we're thinking more about the educational practices and programs that are designed to accelerate and extend the learning for our students. We're also thinking about opportunities to engage them in more rigorous coursework and also being able to support our schools in doing so. And then the last bucket of that work is really about access and opportunity. So making sure that all students have the resources and the supports that they need in order to access these rigorous opportunities, making sure that we are eliminating barriers that creates opportunities for students not to access these accelerative opportunities. So the first part of that, when we're talking about policy and practices, as we mentioned, AIG is just one component of that. So the data that you saw earlier today was our identified gifted students and their performance data. But there's legislation that governs the work of accelerative opportunities and advanced learning opportunities throughout North Carolina. And some of those you can see on the screen. So in addition to the Article 9B that we talked about earlier, you'll see other legislation and policies that govern the work of advanced learning, such as advanced placement courses, honors courses, and our auto enrollment and advanced math courses. So all of that work lives here in advanced learning. Then when we're thinking about academic advancement, these are the accelerative opportunities, and it's more than just the policy, making sure that students can access these opportunities, making sure that our programming meets the needs of our students. Some of these are state programs, some of these are unique to Wake County. So some of them you'll see on our screen, such as early kindergarten entry, that is something that is supported by the state, but with whole grade advancement, for example, is specific to Wake County. This year, not only have we been able to support our students and our leaders in guiding this work, we've also been able to have a cohort of principals to help them guide the work of advanced learning within their building. And the last bucket of this work really is about access and opportunity. As we talked about earlier, making sure that we're intentionally leveraging access and opportunity for all students, like we mentioned, by removing unnecessary barriers. Now, this is designed to make sure that we have supports for all ages and for our teachers and leaders as well. Some of these you'll hear a little bit more on the future slides, but some of the examples of this is making sure that we have a community access liaison, for example. This person is a prominent person in the gifted education world that looks at community-based opportunities for our students and matches our students up to those opportunities. We also have our local norming that looks specifically at the data and the progress of our students in Wake County. When that Article 9B states we're comparing students of like peers and like environments, we're able to partner with geospatial and making sure that we have a process to be able to look at that data to make sure that we are removing all barriers to students accessing the academic programming that they need. So as we're talking about this AIG plan and moving into our 25-28 AIG plan, we just wanted to lift up some of the things that you'll see when we bring that plan back to you. So on the screen, you'll see these are the highlighted access areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about them, but wanted to talk a little bit about how the plan is created. So there's a cross-collaborative team that has been working together since the fall that looks at the feedback provided from the state from our last AIG plan, also from their perspective lens, and looks at every 3 years, how can we make this AIG plan better for students, making sure that it's more understandable for our essential partners, and making sure that we're giving students the opportunity to reach their full potential. So on here, you'll see some of the things that you'll see highlighted in our AIG plan when we bring that back is expanding access. So talking specifically around single subject acceleration, that is an opportunity, an accelerative opportunity offered to Wake County Public School students. And you'll see in our plan or in our practices that we are giving opportunities to our newly enrolled families, making sure that they too can access that opportunity. And that'll be a highlighted practice in our coming 25-28 AIG plan. Also, our high school support. So we're really happy to be able to partner with our high schools in order to make sure that our students who need those accelerative opportunities understand what those accelerative opportunities are and are able to access them. Not only are we trying to make sure that students are on the right pathway as far as academic programming is concerned, we're also helping students prepare post-secondary experiences. So making sure that they understand universities and colleges that are available to them, and even providing tours for them to be able to prepare for that experience outside of their time with Wake County. In our plan, we'll also talk a little bit about high-quality instruction. So this will be a cross-collaborative attempt to look at how do we make sure that our honors courses that we offer at the secondary level are at the rigor level that is required by the state. And so we're currently working on that to make sure that all of those courses are aligned to that. And then the last piece, which is a highlight for our AIG plan, is our high-quality teachers. So we are very excited. Our very first cohort of Wake County teachers are completing their AIG certification. We have partnered with an institution of higher education so that by the end of this experience, they would actually be AIG certified. The nice part about this is not only are those teachers learning about North Carolina practices and national practices, they're also looking at that embedded into our learning model and learning opportunities that are specific to Wake County. We've been able to partner with this institution of higher education to make sure that when a teacher leaves there, not only do they have all the knowledge that they need to be able to support an advanced learner, they understand what that looks like in our current framework. So as we think about the timeline for our AIG plan, as I mentioned before, we started in the fall. Usually this is a year or even more effort to make sure, like I said, that every 3 years this plan is better than it was before, or making sure that we're looking at every aspect of making improvements to our plan. This cross-collaborative team has been meeting on a bi-weekly basis, and they bring the lens of various departments and teams. That is going on currently. In the spring, we have deployed, actually quite recently, some surveys for our families, essential partners, some of our teachers, in order to make sure that we get their feedback as well as we're developing the plan. And then later in April, we'll actually have a listening session with some of our community partners to be able to hear from them as well as to how can we make sure that Wake County plan is the best it can possibly be in order to support our gifted learners. And of course, today we are here to be able to give you a high-level overview and a highlight as to what we'll see going into our AIG plan, as well as some of the refocused work that we're currently doing. And then in our future, we want to be able to bring you a red-lined AIG plan that will show you how and what changes has been made in the AIG plan or updates so that you can easily follow that and we can gain your feedback before bringing that back to the board for final approval. So I know that was a lot and it's a little bit of time, but I wanted to make sure that I open it up for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sproul-Roberts. I know this is a topic that board members have often asked about. I really appreciate you bringing this to us in so many parts. This really does seem to be a more comprehensive dive into this than we've seen in the past. So I know that we do have questions. Ms. Edmonds.
So I have two. Can you tell us some of the community partners? I know that, was it Paige spoke
Yes.
last meeting? Are there others?
Yes, and I don't know them all offhand. I know we did send an invitation to Paige. We sent an invitation to Bright Links. We sent an invitation to the president of Delta Gems. We've also,
It's okay. I mean, I put you on the spot, but I just...
yes, I did give you the list.
I didn't know who you
Yeah.
meant. And then
extended it to board members.
Okay. And then my other question is on slide 17, where you talk about the AIG certification. You said that that's our first cohort? What does that mean?
Yes.
We've had AIG for a long, long time.
Absolutely, so I'm glad you
So,
asked.
yeah, so can you tell me about that?
Yes, so we're really excited about this opportunity, and you're right, we have AIG certified teachers throughout our county, but what we have been able to do is, in some of these cases, even sponsor our teachers in order to be able to get this certification, right? And so not only are they just getting the practice certification, but they're also getting that practical, real-world, being able to implement those instructional strategies through courses that they take through the partnership that we have with one of our local universities.
And I'm not following how that's different than what we had in the past. Did they have to do that independently? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So we've supported them to do this
Yes.
rather than, okay.
Yeah, I think in the past they have gotten their certifications outside of us.
Gotcha.
This time we have been able to actually sit down with the university so that everything that they're getting matches up with what they'll see here in Wake County, specifically for
Okay.
Wake County teachers.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Edmonds. Ms. Caulfield?
Yes. I was going to ask, how many of the AIG certified teachers do we have? Is that in every school?
Yes.
It is.
Well, K-8. So every school, K-8 has a AIG certified teacher. And that's because we support them through differentiated support. And then in 9-12, we differentiate that by accelerative opportunities, right? So everything from honors all the way to advanced placement.
Ms. Caulfield, those are allotted based on numbers of AIG students in the building. So it's kind of a tiered allotment approach. So the more AIG identified students, the more months of employment for AIG a school would receive.
Yes.
Okay. And just to verify what you said in the beginning, and this is more for like legislative ask, the 4% that we have towards AIG, your numbers are 30,531. That's in Wake County, correct?
Yes.
So if we have 161 students, you're saying that we would cap out at 6,400 students, 6,440.
When I multiplied 30,500 times .04, that's about the number that I got. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that for anybody that's listening up there.
And that becomes a local expense.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Can you talk more about the partnering for the 3-year plan? I know we have spoken about it, but just for anybody else that could contribute in here, can you talk about like the meetings that are coming up and the collaboration that you're going to have?
Yes, are you meaning specifically the listening session?
Yes.
Yes, so the listening session, actually, I think invitations went out yesterday. And so that listening session will happen in April. And this is an opportunity, there's 3 main areas thinking about the components of the AIG plan that we're hoping to get some feedback on, right? And just to kind of hear what are some of the perceptions, what are some of the things that you're hoping to get more information around, and how can some of that inform not only what goes into the AIG plan, but in practicing the communication.
Okay, and listening session meaning we're hearing from the partners?
Yes.
So that we can
Yes.
collect the data?
Yes,
Okay.
so we'll have someone that's facilitating that event so that we can actually sit down and sit back and being able to listen to what our community partners are asking.
And Ms. Caulfield, I would even add too that those are formal opportunities through the listening sessions. Certainly as constituents reach out to board members, we're always happy to engage directly with parents, individual parents, families, others that may have input or thoughts based on their own experiences, positive, negative, anything in between. It doesn't necessarily have to only be through a formal channel. So anytime there's opportunities to make those connections with our office or via the school, we're always happy to hear that feedback and would appreciate it.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I have one more thing. I'll save the rest of what I want for the listening session.
Okay.
or what I'm inquiring about, because some of it might be answered there.
Okay.
Can you talk about parents and their engagement with the schools and how that works to identify these children? I know we have like a whole process of how we identify them, but how do we include the parents in there who are, like what is their process if they're inquiring about fulfilling this for their child? Or even how to know if their child even is, qualified for an AIG. They may miss, some of the behavioral issues sometimes are perceived as the child is suffering when they're actually need to be more engaged. So how do we approach our parents with that?
So I think it's a couple of ways. So if a parent has a suspicion that the student needs this differentiated support, they simply have to contact this school and the AIG teacher at the school, and they can request that there is a screening that is done. The nice part about that is that at our last AIG plan review, if you remember, we exposed a lot of gifted identification opportunities, which expands how you look at data in order to identify students. So whenever a parent feels like their child needs that differentiated support, you simply have to make that request, and that can be honored. The other way we kind of get in front of that is we have screening opportunities, right? And so right now, we are screening students at second grade. We have previously screened students in third grade to make sure that students that we may not know that they need these gifted, these accelerative opportunities or this advanced academic exposure, that we don't miss them, right? So that is one process. The other thing that we have is we make sure that our AIG teachers, when they meet in their teams, and we love our acronyms, so this team is actually called SBCGE, which is specifically about gifted learners. And so what they're expected to do is really to screen our universal screening data, right? And so how are we looking at our M-class data, those data points that we're actually giving to students on a regular basis, and making sure that we're keeping a pulse on those students who are outperforming our peers. Another aspect of that is we have what is called a local norming. And so in that local norming, we have worked with Geospatial, and they have a database in which they look at various data points and able to look at a student based on their 1 mile radius. They generate a listing of students, and we're able to submit those students to schools so that we can say, hey, we have a few kids here that maybe we might have missed, that they're outperforming their peers, so that their school-based team can look to dig in to see if they need that differentiated support.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Dr. A.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking at slide 14 about the academic advancement. Can you expound on the compacted courses and what does that entail, and the access to that? Because I've gotten requests from people with families in my area that they wanted to go to a school specifically for compacted math courses, and so I wanted to know what it entails and how accessible they are.
So I can only speak to compacted courses as it relates to advanced learning. And so when we speak about compacted courses, we have some of our elementary students who are accessing 6+ and 7+ because they participate in single subject acceleration. So in that specific instance, they're participating in a 6+ course, which is that 6th grade, part of 7th grade, and then it's the 7th, all the rest of 6th grade and all of 7th grade. So for compacted courses for us, it's specifically aligned to our single subject accelerated students.
And Mr. Ng, to your point, there are magnet offerings specific to some compacted course opportunities that might not necessarily be available universally across the entire district due to the nature of that particular magnet program.
Right, and that's kind of where I've seen I guess the difficulty lies in the fact that it is part of the magnet program, but yet how do we get a person to a magnet program that has those kind of course offerings, right? And so that's something that we all I've seen in my couple of years being on the school board, and I just wanted to highlight that.
Yes, sir. And it's something that we manage quite a bit, as you might imagine, in terms of making sure that parents and families are aware of the various channels by which they can accelerate. And so it may not necessarily be, or it might be that for a compacted double up in math in the 7th grade, for example, it might be available at a magnet middle school and perhaps not a non-magnet middle school. But there are other opportunities, I think, that we would point students and families towards that could land them in the same place when they get to high school, for example, when they're preparing for college and career and beyond. So I would say, yes, it is a little bit of a balancing act, I think, to the point of your question, but also I think we're pretty confident that if the student in the Wake County Public School System needs access to accelerated coursework, they have world-class opportunities to do so that probably are difficult to match up with in many other LEAs across North Carolina, magnet or not.
Gordon, did you have any questions? I have a couple questions, and if you'll indulge me a little bit, I have a direction that I'm going with this. Can we go back to one of the slides that you shared? Specifically, I think it's slide 9 that talks about college and career readiness.
Forgive me, I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Okay, it's the one with the bar graphs. There you go. So, here we do see a high percentage of the AIG students showing college and career readiness, as one would expect. I mean, as you said, some of these students could come in on day one and, perhaps, score, a proficient score. But if these are some of our most gifted learners, what is going on with the other 9% that are not college and career ready? I guess the first question is, you said these are those that scored a 4 or 5. If you added in those who did get a proficient score, a 3, 4, or 5, would it take these numbers over the top?
It's
or would you
over
still see-
99%.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yes, sir.
all of these students are showing proficiency.
Almost all. In fact,
Almost
I think
all.
for state reporting purposes, it will be a greater than 95% because they won't tell you that it's 99%. But when you look at the individual, I can look at the state dashboard right now and see that, for example, depending on the benchmark, 7% of those 91% are at level 3, depending on the test. That, to your point of your question, almost 99 or more percent are at least proficient.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And I guess I was curious about the number because I'm wondering, out of the larger set of students that are AIG identified, we have a subset that are twice exceptional, so that they might show, they might be able to test for gifted levels of, AIG status, but maybe they have some qualities of neurodiversity. Maybe some have, exhibit some qualities like there could be on the autism scale or dyslexia. And I'm curious how we serve those twice exceptional students, and if we see any sort of gap in testing.
So I can't say that we see gaps in testing, but as far as servicing our twice exceptional students, we've done a lot in making sure that we're educating our teachers first on how to identify and look at a twice exceptional child, right? Of course, there's a lot more to do to make sure that we recognize students can have areas that they need support in and also have that exceptionality and need that differentiated support. We have looked at some preliminary numbers. We can get that to you of how many students are actually identified as twice exceptional. But when we're thinking about their tailored support, the nice part about it is that each student has an ISP, right? And that is a differentiated education plan specifically for them. So that gives schools a flexibility in order to meet the specific needs of the students. So not only do they submit to their school what that pacing looks like across the board for our gifted learners, but there's also that individualized plan that we can get as specific as we need to and vary that support based on that student's need. So if that student needs a lot of push-in support, they can receive that. If they need more of that small group, schools have the flexibility in order to provide that to all of our students.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so I guess, so that goes to where I wanted to end up here, which is about some of the funding. So as we talked about, there's a state AIG funding cap of about 4% of your total enrollment. Is that
Yes, sir.
accurate? And we see that with an 11% average enrollment statewide, and then Wake County having a 19% average, that with that funding cap, you're only funding about a third of those students statewide and about a fifth of those students here in Wake County. When we get funds for AIG services, what exactly are those funds for? Is that something that just comes to the district that we have the discretion to spend? Or is that something that has to be used for services that the state has said these are necessary and proper services for AIG education?
I can start. First of all, and I don't want to misspeak, but I believe the per pupil, per capita funding amount is somewhere in the neighborhood of around $1,300 per student. So going back to Ms. Caulfield's question and kind of that math equation, 6,000 plus times that amount, at about that $1,300 per student rate. And I think that's been pretty level for a number of years. That's one of the reasons I think we keep pointing back to that number. I can't speak specifically to parameters or requirements for how those funds are used per se, other than meeting those state requirements that we share. What I can say is, like many other aspects of our operation, the vast majority of that funding is for in-school, in-classroom teacher support. And certainly when we come back next time, we can provide a breakdown to the board to share a little bit more about what are any potential restrictions or flexibilities the state provides, and then how is Wake choosing to utilize those resources that we do have.
Because what I'm wondering about is if it's a fair statement to say, with the ISP plans, we have an obligation, like a legal requirement, to provide these services, but we're only able to fund meeting that requirement through our local funds.
And I would say that the majority of the dollars are spent on teachers. And local funding kicks in, but when we really start to look at, as we're identifying more students, we still don't have enough to provide or allot teachers at the ratios that we want. And so I would say that the bulk of the money is spent on teachers for that 4%. And anything else that is extra really comes from local funding to support the program.
So all of those other students beyond those that are identified,
Nurturing,
all of that's going to come from that local
that
fund.
local part.
And so what I add to that, Mr. Chair, is that we do know that we have to provide for the testing that has to take place. I'm sure that comes out of that funding as well. And so there are going to be a host of teachers that are coming out of local that don't come out of the old 34 funding. And so the bulk of that is going to be used to identify all of the employees or teachers that are there. But it's going to be well beyond that in terms of what's needed. But what I want to essentially emphasize is that it is the 4% that the state funds, and you can certainly see that we're well beyond the 4%. We're 18 or 19%. Now, the state only funds 4% for everybody, and so we recognize that they set a limit because the criteria are set locally, and so if they said they would identify or pay for 30% of the students, you can bet your bottom dollar we're going to identify 30%. But they try to set what is a standard in terms of what they're willing to fund. But we know that it's more than 4%. It may not be 13% like the EC funding, but that is the portion that they have that is all local options in terms of how we identify with EC, both state and federal. There are specific guidelines that you have to follow in order to be identified. Every district sets their own standards based on the general statutes, and that's going to vary. So that's why you see sort of that cap at 4%. And we do know the number of students is beyond that, but they, at this point, have not gone beyond that in my 25, almost 30 years. But that's where that difference comes in, because there are local requirements that vary amongst the districts.
Ms. Caulfield?
Just to follow up, Dr. Taylor, can you, or whoever, speak about how we go about identifying them? You mentioned that it's set locally. There's a certain procedure that we follow, obviously.
So I'll let the staff talk about that, but That is part of the AIG plan that we develop in terms of what achievement scores, what any psychological testing that we might do, any alternate routes that we may identify students that are not captured under that first portion. Quite often we're going to set achievement levels with EOG or EOC, and that varies in terms of what a district may do. So I'll let you guys talk more specifically, but that's where we have the local option of determining what we want that to be, either very rigorous or less rigorous.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And I wanted to ask for clarity. Are you asking how we identify students?
Yeah, I was at one of our schools, and I was speaking with one of the AIG teachers there, and she was talking about how they've been able to identify more students. So with what we're talking about today, if you could just kind of go over like
Some
what
of the
that looks like.
identification
Yes.
opportunities. So it's just like Dr. Taylor mentioned. So we call them gifted identification opportunities. And those of you who historically have been here, we moved away from what was called gateways to these gifted identification opportunities. These are just multiple ways in order to look at students to see if they have or need that differentiated support. So one is the testing, right? So there's testing that can be done for students to be identified. There's also what we call our portfolio process, which looks at authentic assessments that are taken within a school day or in their classroom to see if there's some gifted potential there. We have what is called an EOG data review, right? So when that EOG data comes out, remember we talked about looking at that data to make sure our high-performing students, do we have them captured there? In each of those, there are rubrics in order to use that. And then we talked about our universal screening opportunities, which is another way to kind of capture those students, as well as parent and student nominations. They can nominate themselves, teachers can nominate. And I think I captured most of them. So the whole point is to make sure that we look at every student every way possible, and we're more of a talent scout instead of trying to deter students if they need that differentiated support.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any further questions? If not, thank you all.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next agenda item. We're looking forward to the next presentation on this topic. Next, what we do have is the WCPSS Summer Learning Opportunities. We'll switch team. We'll welcome Ms. Ramirez-Carter.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
We want to highlight some of our summer learning opportunities, but also take a moment to share some of the work that happened last summer. That we also want to outline our upcoming 2025 summer learning initiatives and goals, and present some EOG and EOC remediation and re-administration plans that will help us with student performance for this current year. Again, all of our presentations tie back to the strategic plan. These offerings really help us support our students in achieving high-quality core instruction and helping them succeed in that area, and helping us begin to analyze and work with our data to ensure that all of our students are getting closer and closer to the goal. And we think about academics and behavior together. And so when we think about expanding access for high-quality instructional opportunities and providing safe and inclusive learning opportunities. And so I want to turn it over to Delinda Ramirez-Carter to walk us through and recap some of our summer offerings from last summer.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson-Norman. So I'll share a recap over the summer programs. There's some of them listed here on the screen for us. And we'll start with our elementary programs in this review. Looking at the Read to Achieve camp, the purpose of this camp is to provide an additional education program outside of the instructional calendar as a literacy intervention for students in grades 2 and 3 who demonstrate difficulty with reading development. In 2024, we had 65 host sites with a little more than 2,000 students that attended. 2 of our sites were co-managed by the YMCA Power Scholars and WCPSS. For all of our sites, transportation and meals were available. Legislation requires 72 hours of reading instruction. We met that requirement through the use of EL Skills Block and the Solid Start curricula. You will see on the right that we had some of the attendance data broken down by calendar. Of the roughly 2,500 traditional and modified calendar students that were invited, 57% of them attended at least one day. And of the roughly 1,400 multi-track year-round and single-track year-round students that were invited, 40% attended at least one day. In total, we had a little over 4,000 students invited, and 51% of them attended. As a way to provide support, ensure consistency and fidelity of instruction, walkthroughs were conducted at host sites. They were performed by both Central Services and Central Services staff and camp leads. The tool aligned to the instructional levers. As reflected, 79% of observed evidence that specific learning targets were made explicit to students. 95% found that most students were engaged in activities that aligned with specific learning targets. And 88% observed that teacher utilizing checks for understanding and or providing feedback to students. At the end of camp, we also deploy feedback surveys to students, families, and camp staff. 93% of families agree that attending camp was beneficial for their child, considered camp effective at supporting reading and literacy growth, and would recommend camp to another family. 76% of students thought camp helped them to become a better reader, felt the teacher helped them to feel comfortable every day, and thought camp was fun. Lastly, 88% of camp staff felt that camp was beneficial to the students. On the right side of the slide, we have attendance outcomes by grade and number of days. As reflected, 48% of our second and third grade students attended camp for 10 or more days. 41% attended camp between 5 and 9 days, and 11% attended camp between 1 and 4 days. On the left side of the screen, we have the end of camp testing outcomes. Of the second grade students tested, 23% of them met the end of camp M-class composite expectation and were at least proficient. Of the third grade students tested, 37% met the 725 lexile requirement for a good cause exemption. However, some of those students had met the goal at end of year and still came to camp. So we pulled the students that met the 725 lexile for the first time and found that 23% of the third graders also met that expectation after camp. The extra 12 days of instruction was enough for some students to reach proficiency and encourage growth with other students. Lastly, we wanted to know why parents were declining camp. So we requested that information on the camp invitations. Again, we invited a total of 4,045 students. Of those, 51% accepted and attended at least one day, and 49% declined. 74% of those that declined provided a reason, which is displayed on the graph. Nearly 39% cited vacation as the reason. Nearly 26% cited attending another camp. 6% cited moving out of district, and nearly 30% cited other reasons. As mentioned, 2 of our campsites were served through the Power Scholars program. The Power Scholars program is a joint venture between the YMCA and WCPSS. Instead of the typical 12 days of the Read to Achieve camp focused solely on reading, Power Scholars is a 5-week program that adds additional components such as enrichment and math. Unlike the Read to Achieve camp, Power Scholars serves rising 1st through 5th grade students. The invitation requirements for 2nd and 3rd remain the same since those 2 grade levels are the Read to Achieve part of the camp. They are also required to meet the legislative requirements for at least 72 hours of literacy instruction for those 2 grade levels. The rest of their camp focuses on math and enrichment activities due to their longer window. Of the 318 total students invited, 75% attended. You will see their literacy and math gains at the end of camp for at least 1.5 months. They also had positive feedback from their staff, caregivers, and students. This past summer, 2024, we were able to offer different options for our students engaging in the high school credit recovery program. Using the Edgenuity platform, students could engage in learning through virtual, blended, or on-site options. Over 2,000 students enrolled, recovering a total of 3,233 credits over the summer. In addition to the summer credit recovery program, high schools are able to engage in objective, and credit recovery opportunities utilizing Edgenuity throughout the school year. This was our third year partnering with the Wake Ed Partnership to deliver Accelerator program. Each year the program has grown and has earned positive feedback from students and families. One of the primary goals of the program is to expose students to industry and careers in our county. We want them to explore career pathways and investigate careers that might be of interest to them. As in years past, the students indicate that the industry immersions are the highlight of the program, and the learning from those immersions has helped to shape their ideas about the future. Another added benefit has been the exposure to our staff members to the business partners. Some staff have forged relationships that allow schools to return with more students throughout the school year. We also maintain our partnership with District C for summer experiences. Students work collaboratively to offer real-world solutions to business problems that industry partners presented to them. Teams of students pitch their ideas of industry to the industry partners at the end of the week. Consistently, students report learning and increased skill in working with a team as a result of this program, and business partners are impressed with the ideas and skills of the students that provided the solutions. Both the Wake Ed Career Accelerator and the District C Teamship will be offered in summer 2025. Moving on to our EOG and EOC remediation and readministration plan. Last year we continued with this plan and this program for all schools K through 8. High schools could opt in. All schools offered remediation sessions prior to retesting. Retesting occurred on the teacher workdays after the last student day. The additional proficient scores equated to a little over 1% proficiency gain for the district as a whole, with some schools showing as much as a 5 to 6% proficiency gain. And lastly, our extended school year services are provided to students with individualized education plans outside of the traditional school year. Our ESY program aims to support students in maintaining or regaining emerging and or critical skills over the summer break to avoid significant regression or learning loss. The ESY for summer of 2024 served a total of 429 students. A wide range of services from academic to therapeutic support was provided. ESY services ensure students receive specifically designed instruction and therapeutic services to maintain essential skills. Support and resources provided included transportation along with breakfast and or lunch at the host site to ensure student well-being. And finally, certified special education teachers along with instructional assistants provided specially designed instruction and support. In addition, speech therapists, occupational therapists, and physical therapists contributed to specialized services to help students with specific needs per their IEP.
All right, so that's a recap of 2024, and I think for the board's context, we've done these updates every spring since 2022. Twofold purpose, right? Number one, to provide the data that Delinda just kind of went through in terms of progress monitoring, which obviously is important, but also to share with you the feedback and input that we would like to apply each year to make programming better each successive summer. And so this is a quick overview for that second goal, which is to provide a preview of what's coming in 2025. First of all, you'll note that for elementary, this will again include Read to Achieve and Power Scholars, credit recovery, and again, CTE Career Accelerator programming in our high schools. And also, we will continue, I think, for the third or fourth consecutive year, EOG and EOC remediation and retesting across grade spans. And we'll share a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. I also do want to note, if you've seen these presentations over the last several years, you'll note, again, to highlight this menu is reduced from what it was in 2022. And it's been kind of a steady but gradual removal of programs that specifically had received funding by the state and by federal COVID relief dollars during and after the pandemic. And so many of those funding sources, as you well know, have sunset, and so along with them, the programs have sunset with them. So I did want to call out the fact that this menu is quite a reduced menu from what it was 2 or 3 years ago, but it is reflective of what this menu looked like pre-pandemic. So we've essentially returned to kind of a pre-pandemic menu of what summer learning looks like in the Wake County Public School System. So just a quick overview of Read to Achieve, as Delinda kind of shared with you, the intent and the purpose and the functionality behind it. For 2025, Read to Achieve camps, much of the structures that have been in place the last few years will remain. Few upgrades to increase efficiency and foster a greater experience for students and families based on some of that feedback that you just saw from our parents and families. That includes things, I know a big question mark, rightfully so, every year is how aggressive are we ensuring, especially with Read to Achieve, where we're talking about grade level proficiency, which is vital, especially at a younger grade level. What are we doing to ensure all of our families are in the know and aware and have access to these opportunities? And so each year we try to kind of enhance and improve and strengthen multifaceted communications efforts. I can tell you that in that area for this year already, we've sent save the date postcards our teams have in communications, collaboration with them. We're also updating invitations to appear, quite frankly, more graphically appealing, that stand out. Little things like that matter, in addition to just follow-up communications and consultations one-to-one and in small groups as appropriate as we determine eligibility for our students and families at the elementary level. We did gain a new multi-track year-round school, but we're able to combine some of our single-track year-round schools, which will, we hope, positively impact things like transportation costs. And I do want to highlight there are significant costs associated with operating these programs beyond the regular school year. Our team, Delinda, our elementary regional support teams, and others, transportation do a phenomenal job every year coordinating those logistics. But there's quite a bit that has to go into making bus routes work. Mr. Schneidmiller and his team identifying drivers that aren't already tied up with schools that are in session, also finding people that can drive routes for schools that are out of session. So it really is kind of a complex web of work that has to be done. We also would want to mention that based on some of our teacher feedback on how to improve their planning and provide supports for them with rotations and instructions, our teams have helped purchase headphones and things like audio splitters and solid start text. And I'll have to defer to one of our teammates later if there's questions about exactly what that is. I'm sure they can explain that better than I certainly can. Also, Power Scholars, grades K through 5. Again, the YMCA program is expanding with the addition this coming year of Southeast Raleigh Elementary School to the program, along with PO and BUG, which have been in the program the last couple of years. This day-to-day program structure will remain the same as in past years. In terms of high school credit recovery, we are again pleased to be able to offer credit recovery programming again this summer. We have worked with schools with our Edgenuity tool to be able to provide a more flexible, accessible, both virtual but blended and in-person option for students, so that can kind of address at times things like accessibility and a student's ability to be in classroom. There's always going to be some level of commitment that has to occur at the high school level when you're talking about assessments, for example. It might have to be done in person, but again, we're working to provide as much flexibility as we can within the parameters that are provided for students to have access and be successful. We don't have a specific slide. Delinda was just sharing a little bit about the Career Accelerator program. We will operate that again for a fourth consecutive summer. I will note part of the reasons that we're operating that again this year is that there was an extension provided by the state with some federal funding sources that allowed us to go ahead and plan proactively for that for at least one more year. And as you recall, the impetus of that program was really to provide those kind of career connections and internships at a time during the pandemic when that was impossible to do so, or certainly more challenging to do so. And so as those more typical during school year opportunities are opening up, hopefully the need for this kind of program into the future will be less than it certainly was more intensively 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. But we will be operating that program again, and there's some great opportunities for students in that regard in 2025. As Delinda mentioned, we will again operate and offer remediation and retesting for our students beginning in grade 3 with EOCs and EOGs. I think you saw the data point there. It's not an insignificant number. I think I saw a couple of thousand students that reached proficiency, somewhere around 25%, that were not proficient the first time they sat for the test. And so we feel like it is worth the squeeze in terms of the work and the time and the effort. Area superintendents certainly work closely with data research and accountability and our teams to make sure all the structures are in place. It requires staffing plans, all of those things to coordinate. At a time of the year, obviously, where capacity is stretched thin, it has turned out to be a really positive addition the last 3 years in wake in terms of this opportunity, both for our kids, but also for the district as a whole, when we're talking about overall EOC and EOG metrics that are, of course, important both at the district level, but also especially for our schools. And then, again, Delinda mentioned we will be offering the Special Education Services Extended School Year program over 15 days in July 8th through the 28th in 2025. ESY services are designed, as you know, to help students with IEPs maintain academic and behavioral and functioning skills or functional skills during the summer months. Services include related supports like speech, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. ESY 2025 will be delivered at 5 host sites, serving pre-K through grade 12, and that'll be at Barton Pond, Cary Elementary, Bridges, Carroll Middle School, and also Athens Drive High School. In addition to the summer ESY program, students attending modified or year-round schools do have ESY services available during extended breaks, for example, during trackouts. And so there are accommodations that are made to ensure that our multi-track year-round students have access to those traditionally summer programs as well. And then in closing, just kind of a review of next steps that are ongoing. This is work that our teams are involved in right now. We're in the midst of recruiting staff, but also determining student eligibility. And that's another factor that can be a very complex effort in terms of knowing exactly which students and when are going to be eligible, for example, for Read to Achieve, trying to predict how many bus routes that might translate to, and recruiting drivers and other staff. Communications and enrollment, as I mentioned, are also occurring at this time, particularly when it comes to save the dates and also forecasting when those opportunities are going to be available. Transportation, staff compensation are all things each year that we work with HR, transportation, and all other offices to work through. We will again be instituting in collaboration and partnership with Data Research and Accountability those progress monitoring metrics. We want to make sure with the investment that's involved, both in personnel and dollars, that we're seeing positive progress and results from our kids that are participating in those programs. And then we will be back, as we've done for the last several successive years, to the board with additional updates in the future, both in terms of future programming, but also results that will occur in this summer of 2025. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions or provide additional information on summer programming.
All right, questions from the committee? Ms. Gordon and Ms. Evans?
Thank you for the information. I want to speak specifically to, or my question is in regard to the Power Scholars program. So first, I want to say I can certainly appreciate that several opportunities are given to students to make sure that we are meeting them where they are and giving them the services that they need. But I wonder, so we know that data suggests that there's a strong correlation between like out-of-school opportunities and the success of students. I noticed when we went through the slides about the attendance, that the attendance was certainly not as high for the summer program in connection with the Power Scholars program. So my question is, what thought has been given to possibly adding more after-school opportunities so that we can, continue to have those high numbers, but also the second question is, how are those target audiences identified for the Power Scholars program?
So I'm going to turn on your second question in terms of the Power Scholars program to our elementary staff. Anybody want to share a little bit about Power Scholars? And then we can also speak to your question about any other additional programming thoughts that we may have to maybe supplement gaps that may occur for those kiddos that aren't, for whatever reason, able to participate.
Yes, that's a great question. So 3 years ago, when the YMCA approached us about partnering for Power Scholars, we looked at student achievement, and we picked some schools that may need a boost with student achievement that could really benefit from the 5-week program. So we maintained those schools over the course of 3 years, and this year we were able to add an additional school. And again, we looked at student achievement data and determined which school to add. Another factor that we consider is proximity to the schools that's already participating in the program. And so based on those two factors, Southeast Valley Elementary School was added.
And then I think to the second question, just as important, we use some of the same data points when making decisions about, again, with the understanding that resources are limited, right? I think we know and understand that, but even things like our Wake Together and Helps tutoring programs, NC Ed Core, even after-school tutorial programs that may be funded with school-based resources, intervention allotments and those kinds of things that are targeted based on student need or school need based on those data. We try to make sure that some of the gaps in participation can potentially be filled with kind of a menu of options, maybe to the point of your question, so it's not a one and done or all or nothing proposition for kids in terms of extra support. So a lot of those extended support programs, again, understanding that funding always is limited, are targeted for schools that have the highest need based on some of these same metrics.
Can I ask a follow-up?
That's a great question.
My follow-up question is, you spoke about the proximity was one of the factors in choosing those target audience sites. Has there been any, do we have any other community partners that we are able to partner with that may be able to provide along the same lines that the YMCA is able to provide? Because you said YMCA reached out to us. So are we able to reach out to any other community partners that may be able to, so that the possibility of expanding the Power Scholars program is possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And other team members can jump in. I know that we've worked with the Boys and Girls Club of Wake County, for example, to try to make sure that we're pointing kids in their direction and also coordinating and collaborating communications. But I think to answer your question transparently, there's always growth opportunity for us to find other community partners, and certainly anybody that's out there that's available and willing, we're always looking to partner, recognizing that that's a need and a gap that's always going to be there that can't necessarily always be filled by dollars and cents on the district side. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Edmonds?
Yeah, so my questions are primarily around Read to Achieve. That's legislated to have those camps.
It is, yes, ma'am.
Are there any of the other programs that you, either last year or coming up, that are legislated, or that's just our initiative?
The CTE Career Accelerator is not, I'm not sure that it's legislated. It is earmarked funding specifically via those kind of extended COVID relief funds from the state for that specific purpose.
Okay.
Credit recovery and also now remediation and retesting is not necessarily a requirement, but that does fall under a state umbrella in terms of the parameters that we have to follow.
I mean, I'm supportive of all of them. I was just
Yes, ma'am.
curious. And then remind me, Dr. Taylor, I think this is for you. Does the state fund the Read to Achieve camps?
Yes, there's funding that comes along.
That is funded, okay. And
Do we have a quick
Yes,
comment from
ESY
Andrew?
is also.
Just go ahead and identify yourself first.
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry, Shiloh Lewis with Special Education Services.
Thank you.
ESY is also a mandated program through our policy.
okay, great. And then my last comment really is on slide 9. I know Mr. Cook, you said you don't have your slide numbers. It's basically the results of the Read to Achieve camp. They're concerning. So how's that look? Because Read to Achieve, the summer camps have been happening for some time now. So have we stayed consistent? Are we getting better? Is it getting worse with those results? Now this is just attendance.
Yeah.
If you go forward, that's the results. And I find that concerning. Anybody else?
Well, so first of all, and I can't speak, I don't have the multi-year comparative data in front of me. Others may be aware of that. I think we share the concern, broadly speaking. It is a tremendous amount of work and time and effort that goes into providing support to a very specified group of kids at a critical juncture in their education. We certainly would love to see better results. And that said, I don't want to understate the hard work that our teachers and administrators, and you're not either, I know. But it is a little bit at times disheartening to pour that much time, effort, and attention into a endeavor like this and not see better outcomes. But I do think it also speaks, though, to how challenging this work is. I mean, we're talking about a group of kids. I mean, you think about it, if we quantify the number of days and hours that a child spends in a Read to Achieve camp in July, and you saw all the other reasons why their peers aren't there, all the other distractions that are going on, I think we recognize all the challenges that are there. And those are kids that every single day in the classroom, with the very best efforts of all of their teachers and administrators and parents and families for the entire school year, weren't proficient. And so I think we do have to acknowledge and recognize we're talking about a really small sliver of time comparatively to bring that student up to a proficient level. So I think we share always your, maybe I won't use the word disappointment. It is sometimes, though, quite frankly, disheartening to work that hard and not see 100% that meet that benchmark. But I do think it's reflective of how hard the work is.
Yeah, so not today, but I would like to see how this compares since the program started. To just, because I'd like to know if this is pretty consistent and I'm not asking about attendance, I'm asking about outcomes. And I'd also like, if there's a way for us, I know that we're not doing helps anymore, but we are doing something similar with Wake Ed Partnership, right? Didn't we bring something back? I'd like to know how the Read to Achieve camps outcomes compare, because we saw the helps program, and I don't know that they were targeting the same students, but those results were just off the charts. And I hope we're going to get those same results with this new thing that we're doing with Wake Ed. But I would like to know some kind of comparison, and I don't know what could be done about it if we found that there was a drastic difference, you know what I mean? But I would like to know that.
Yes, ma'am.
Did I articulate that?
I think we did, and we don't have to wait for another board presentation. I think we can get our hands on some data. And Rita, you may have some additional information.
Okay,
she may
sure.
have it right now.
So, Sarita Smith.
Great.
So, it was only recently in the last 3 or 4 years that the state instituted an end-of-camp assessment so that we can measure who was becoming proficient. And so the first year, we had about 100 kids. That would be the summer of 2022. And then in 2023, we increased that to 347 kids becoming proficient. And for this past year's 378. So we have made some intentional changes to the curriculum, the teacher selection, been really targeted with the intervention during camp, and we have seen increases with kids becoming proficient after only 12 days of instruction.
Okay. Can we get that in percentages so that we can see it? Yeah, but thank you for that information.
We'll follow up and share with the whole board some of that data over multiple years.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. That's all I have.
We've got a number of questions queued up. Ms. Gordon had a quick follow-up, then I saw Ms. Caulfield. I've got a question, and then Dr. A.
Yes, along the same lines as Board Member Edmonds, does this data reflect just the Read to Achieve camp, or is this data the Read to Achieve and the Power Scholars? Just Read to Achieve.
We can verify that.
Is there a way to get data on the Power Scholars and to see how they compare?
Yes, ma'am, I would imagine there is. We can probably do that for sure. So maybe an overall breakdown, but also kind of a program-by-program breakdown to see if there's any variability. Yes, ma'am.
I guess my overall point is if we're seeing high attendance numbers with the Power Scholars, I would like to see what the data is also showing us to see if we really need to be maximizing more opportunity with the Power Scholars program. I think that's my overall point.
We can give you that breakdown, yes, ma'am.
Ms. Caulfield.
Thank you. I know there's a lot of information in there, so thank you for spelling that all out. I have a question in reference to I'll be curious to know all the grades and percentages and numbers, so I hope we can have numbers as well with that. In the lower grades, when we get to high school, when did we switch from the summer school to credit recovery? And I'm just curious, more about how we're measuring the success of that, because they're still keeping the F, as I understand it, so their GPA is going to stay the same, which not only for a student is that kind of discouraging, because it's a lot harder for them to recover from that. And especially seeing all the struggles that we've had with our children over the last quite a few years. How do we measure the success for that, knowing that they're doing credit recovery, move on to the next level? How do we know that that is actually working out? Because it is relatively new, right?
High school, summer school has been focused primarily on credit recovery for a number of years.
How many?
For a long time. I mean,
You're talking like a decade?
A decade
Yeah.
plus. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
We've had different.
I'm not going to date when I was,
When I was a high school
when we
principal.
called it summer
that way,
school.
It's been more than a decade.
Okay.
yeah.
So how do we know, measuring, having more than a decade, that is more than enough time that has passed to know that the children are getting the level of success with that? Because we're not going to see it in their GPA. They're going to keep the F, right? And now they have to recover from that and move on. So I'm kind of worried about how we're measuring that to keep track of our success rate with that. Because we are then, especially at the high school level, we're getting to the end of where our job is going to be done and we're going to send them off. So I'm just wondering if they're keeping the F and we're not retesting them. One, we're not giving them the opportunity to kind of lift that back up and get back on track. And then the other thing is, we really don't know what their grade is once they walk away from credit recovery. Because where you mentioned earlier, we're now retesting in the EOGs and EOCs. That's more for our testing and for, the reporting. But what about the content for the child? That's what I'm worried about.
I would say for credit recovery, it is based off of the child's need. So for example, if Mr. Cook fails Math 1 and I fail Math 1, our path may not be the same. So I may have more things to recover than Mr. Cook does. And so I may have to do 5 modules and he may only have to do 2 modules. So that's where it's differentiated for the child based on their assessments and tailored based on their needs. I don't know, Brian, if Drew, you want to add anything, but that's where it's kind of customized.
Yeah, I'll extend on that, and then I think Dr. Johnson can share a little bit more, maybe about even distinction between credit recovery and repeating a course for credit and state requirements in terms of GPA implications. One thing that I will just kind of expand on, yes, we are measuring credits recovered, but another metric to this, and this is probably data that we can mine, and I think it's an area that we can certainly look more deeply into, is oftentimes that credit recovered translates into things like back on grade level and grade level promotion. So many of our students that participate in high school credit recovery are recovering a credit or two. For example, it could be a 9th grade English class that is the difference between being a 9th grader again, and we've shared information about what that means in terms of long-range opportunities for those kids, but also how many kids are graduating. We do have kids that complete a credit in summer school when they actually graduate from high school without having to repeat another semester in another school year. And so I do think we can gather some additional information and maybe even do the same thing that Ms. Edmonds and Ms. Gordon were describing, maybe have a multi-year graphic that shows how many credits, and of those credits, how many resulted, for example, in the next grade level promotion that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. But Dr. Johnson, you can certainly share more.
Yes, Brian Johnson, Senior Director for Regional 1 Academics. So there is a new policy in place with our state starting for the 25-26 school year when it comes to credit recovery. The core content area classes that are graduation requirements are required to have a numerical grade. So when we are doing credit recovery, we will have to adjust our process moving forward for the 25-26 school year, which we have not finalized yet, that guidance. However, there will be a numerical grade that is calculated back into the student. Both grades will be represented on the transcript, but they will have that ability to see that numerical grade as well. And within our policy 3420, as well as student promotion and accountability, there are some opportunities for students currently right now to retake a course. Both courses will show on the transcript as well, but that is typically taking the full course in its entirety for the credit, not necessarily credit recovery as well.
Okay, so the next school year, they will start to see the grade for that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. And if I could ask one more question?
That is for graduation requirement for content areas.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I had one more question. Very disappointed, the helps was wonderful. You know, I've spoken about that before. I really like that program. How will we get, or when will we get an update if we have a replacement there on if that's doing the same, if that's providing the same success?
I don't know why I'm looking at you, Dr. Wilson.
I think it's fairly new, so I would say we need to give it a little time to implement. People are being trained, it's being implemented, so I would say probably a year out. We could begin to look at some milestones, but I don't think we'll know until we really start to get it implemented, and it's new right now.
And in the meantime, Ms. Caulfield, it may be helpful at some point for the board to get kind of an update on, short of any kind of data outcomes that I know Ms. Edmonds was referencing earlier, what is that kind of replacement, and what does that look like, and how is that transition occurring between helps and the new program? And so certainly, short of a data presentation, we're happy to come back at the board's will to provide that update as well.
Thank you. That's what I was going to ask next, because I really did appreciate that helps program, and I know that it's very effective. So I wouldn't want us to get too far out only to find out we're having another setback.
Yes, ma'am.
Why did we get rid of helps again?
Some legal issues and
Yeah.
With the company.
with the company,
Right.
not us.
Thank you, Ms. Caulfield. I have two quick questions, and then we'll let Dr. Ng finish up. With the summer camps, specifically, we saw that of all the students invited, we had just over half attending. Of the rejected invitations, 2/3 of them were because of a conflict with another camp, right? Vacation or another camp. So my question is, when do we send out these invitations? And is there any flexibility to send them out earlier? I know that you're waiting for grades to come in to see who actually qualifies, but as parents, I think some of us know those summer camps open up in February for registration, and oftentimes families are having to put down deposits or make non-refundable investments, so that even if they have an interest here,
Right.
it's just very difficult for them to lose a camp reservation to participate in something like this. Do we have any flexibility of extending these invitations earlier?
That's a great question. I think one thing that I'll mention, and then Ms. Stone or Dr. Smith can speak more, that is one thing that I think we've done for the first time this year, which is to save the date notification. It's not necessarily an invitation. I think to your point, Mr. Haggerty, it's been a little bit of a balancing act in terms of knowing when a kid is going to qualify. Some, I think, we can probably rightfully predict very early. Others, it will really literally come down to the wire. So I know that's one thing that we're trying to do to address exactly what you just described. And Ms. Stone or Dr. Smith, y'all feel free to speak about that more.
The RETO Chief Implementation Team has not only pushed up the date for the Save the Dates camp invitations, but they've also made them more aesthetically pleasing and inviting. Because sometimes to get that notification, how you invited to a RETO Chief camp for a child who is a non-proficient reader may not be the most exciting thing you want to do during your summer. So they've really worked really hard this year to make it inviting, exciting, advertising that it's free transportation, breakfast and lunch is provided for students so that parents can commit earlier this year.
That sounds great. Thank you. And then the last question, you talked a little bit about the extended school year program, and I think you said that it was a program that's mandated by the state government. So I just was curious, is that something that also comes with state funding, or is that something we have to pull from another source?
We pay it out of our EC funds.
Okay.
So it's for exceptional children. Charlie, you want to add?
And I don't want to misspeak, but I believe that's probably federal.
Federal, yep.
Based on that would be a requirement through an IEP team to consider, is a student in need of those services based on their current status.
Is that of IDEA funding or some other source?
IDEA.
Okay. All right. That brings up more concerns. We'll save those for a different committee. All right, that's all my questions. Dr. Ng, you had some questions?
Yeah, actually, you stole my question.
Oh,
No, but that was one of my questions was about the timeline for identifying children who are eligible for the Read to Achieve camp. I mean, I was very fortunate to go visit at Riverbend last year, the Read to Achieve and the Power Scholars, and it was phenomenal. And actually, what sold me was one of the students that was there who just said such wonderful things about his experience that time there, and also the fact that the classes were smaller and had more attention and things like that. And I think that we could even use some of those kind of testimonies as to sell it to the families that we send that information out to. I think I agree. We need to let people know early enough so they can put this on the priority over competing things like schedules. And the other thing that showed up on that data outcomes graph was it's like seems like the more you show up, the better the outcome. And so what can we do in terms of expressing some of the expectations for attendance, so that you don't just show up for half the time or a third of the time, but show up for the whole experience and getting the most out of that experience. So some things to kind of think about. Do we need to have some kind of a verbiage to the parents in terms of expectations and so forth?
And that's a great question. And Sarita, Siobhan, and because I know getting kids there is half the work, right? And I think to your point, we can see the linear progression in terms of attendance increasing and outcomes increasing. But I know that's something we focus on every year.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that we have is that it's a 12-day camp, and sometimes it's hard for people to really know how important it is because it's such a limited amount of time, and especially when there's competing parties like other camps that may last longer, they tend to gravitate towards other camps. But we have really making an intentional effort to reach out to families, so when kids don't show up that first day, second day, or if they start missing days, to call and say, hey, we really want you here, sharing some of the data that the kids are really reporting a positive experience and the outcomes that we're getting. Kids are saying they're becoming better readers because of it. So really being intentional about connecting with families during that experience and prior to the experience. So increasing our communication, like, oh, it's the whole time for camp. We can't wait to see you. And as Siobhan mentioned, and making it more inviting than like a mandate. Even though it's legislatively required, we want them to want to come, and we want them to feel the excitement and know it's going to be fun, and at the same time, they're going to become a more proficient reader.
Yeah, I think, selling it with stories, selling it with experiences from the kids who have been through it, I think that will sell itself.
And I'll tell you, Dr. Ng, one of the changes I've clearly seen when I think about the beginning of Read to Achieve Camp and what was really deemed as something that was mandatory and kind of punitive to where we are now, that it is more inviting. And so we know that we're doing that work to make it something more of a camp. But I think Sarita said it best. It's all of the competing interests that are out there. And so if I'm going to have my child in a camp, I know they close up quick, and once I get accepted, then there's Read to Achieve. Well, we know with daycare camps, you can't miss any days. Well, you can miss, but you still got to pay. So it's all of those competing interests more than anything. But we certainly want to show people the correlation between attendance and student performance. And so just a lot of hard work, but I can tell you I'm really pleased with how we're continuing to elevate. But I think the biggest thing is the competing interest in a summer, and parents are going to always choose. When you look back at that graph, I think it was 38.7% vacation is a reason that they don't come, and that's more than a third. So maybe we can get them to schedule vacation later.
All right, if there's no other questions on this topic, thank you, Ms. Ramirez-Carter, and we will move to our next presentation, which focuses on driver's education and naloxone, and hopefully not at the same time.
Well, with that, these are just two quick thumbnail presentations to basically provide you with an update on where we are on driver's ed. There's always lots of questions about wait time, and where we are on the deployment of our Narcan. And we just wanted to provide a quick update on those two items. So we're going to move along. And so we'll start with driver's education update.
Sorry, I'm going CAIG, summer learning, and into my driver's ed note. So thank you for the opportunity for just a quick update. But we did want to kind of touch on some of, I think, the big rock topics that we have traditionally shared with the board when it comes to driver's education. I think first and foremost, obviously, is the behind-the-wheel wait time discussion. I can share with you, and by the way, Devin Tanner is here today. If there's some specific questions or additional details, he's certainly happy to provide those. We can tell you that the good news is that there have been some reductions in the overall wait time when it comes to that gap between classroom instruction and behind the wheel. The bad news is that those reductions have not necessarily been systemic across all regions of the district. We're still seeing, for example, in the western area, I believe, Devin, in the district, some of the higher wait times, and in some other areas, in the eastern and southeastern areas, we've seen some reductions that have occurred. Part of the reason for some of those reductions in the wait time, we believe, is as a result of something I believe we discussed with the board last year when we were in the midst of renewing our contract with Jordan Driving School. We did contract with 2 additional supplemental contractors to provide the supplemental support to what Jordan Driving School is provided. I believe that both of those contracts have now run their course for this current school year. We do believe that had some positive affect. We do want to kind of reemphasize and point out and be very transparent again, though, too, that in some instances we have seen the same driving or different driving schools who are essentially still in competition for the same limited pool of drivers. And we highlighted this with the board. It's been an ongoing challenge. I think the board is aware of some of the state level impediments to getting more drivers instructors trained. That still is the case. In fact, one not so positive update, I believe, is that we've actually seen by 2 or 3 a reduced number of Jordan Driving School instructors that we've lost for various reasons. I think the number is 69 drivers now. I think that number was around 70 or 72 6 months or a year ago. So it hasn't necessarily dropped precipitously, but I think it is reflective of the ongoing challenges just in the economic marketplace that we're in. Other topics, though, that I think have been important for us to continue to highlight have been around classroom enrollment and registration processes. I think the board will recall we did make some adjustments. For example, we entered the practice this past year of prioritizing the older students, which many times was exacerbating not just the wait time between the classroom and behind the wheel, but to get in the classroom in the first place. And Mr. Tanner has also got, in addition to Jordan Driving School, an additional contractor that he's worked with at times to help with that process and structure, also helping with responsiveness to families in terms of communications. We like to believe that we have seen an uptick in the level of customer service, both from Jordan Driving School, who is working very, very hard, but also via communications from the district office out to our schools, even things, like websites and updates and those kinds of things. And we want to make sure those registration windows are well communicated. And we still, again, transparently get periodic feedback that at 12:01, when a window opens, classes are filling, literally. And so that is a frustration point for parents. And so, again, there's some positive progress in some areas, but I think we've also got to acknowledge there's a lot of work still yet to be done, and there's challenges on the horizon that may make this even more complex moving forward. The last thing that I'll share with you quickly, again, with this overview, is that we will be coming back to the board typically in May, June, to renew, I believe, what is the 3rd year of that 3-year renewable contract with Jordan Driving School. at which time we're happy to bring more detailed information, more specifics on data points, and even other potential options that the board and the district might consider, because this time a year from now, we'll have been in a place where we'll be rebidding the contract. And so if there's feedback from the board going into 25-26 that you all want us to be aware of and consider when we're thinking about what that process looks like, we absolutely want to hear that feedback and are happy to come back in a much more detailed manner in the next couple of months. So with that, happy to answer any questions or provide any clarity if we can.
So just for some clarity, you talked about the strict state requirements. Could you give us a little more information on that?
Yeah, so Devin, you want to speak a little bit about just the challenges we have in terms of getting driver ed instructors trained and that pipeline that continues to be a bit of a challenge in terms of just the pool of drivers or drivers instructors that are out there, even some of the work that we've tried to work with Jordan Driving School on to train our own and what that looks like. Devin, if you want to share.
Yeah, Jordan Driving School is one of, I believe, 4 private driving schools in the state that are certified to teach the DMV certification course. So essentially, Jordan Driving School is able to have an instructor certification course. They used to be 1 a year. We're up to 3. Our next one will be April. I believe we've got 16 candidates that are interested in being at that instructor certification course. Every time we do them, we find that we'll have 16 or 20. That dwindles down to 10 to 12 based on this just isn't for me or whatever other reasons. But we have that opportunity here in Wake County, and an opportunity most school systems and counties don't have. Having said that, the DMV has they basically stopped teaching their course for any private driving schools associated with public school systems now. So if we did not have Jordan Driving School teaching, I would be struggling to find a place where our teachers could be certified. The only state-sponsored certification method was through DPI, and that funding was redistributed to the LEAs rather than having it go to the administration office of DPI. So that teacher training program, we call it the STEM program, has now not been going for about the last 7 or 8 months. They're still trying to find funding at DPI to get that restarted, but because of that, there are 46 counties in the state that have no way to train teachers or certify teachers. And so I know that DPI is working on things to try to figure out how to get funding. I'm not quite sure exactly, what they're gonna do, but it is kind of an emergency situation statewide. I don't want to say it's an emergency for Wake County because we have the ability to train our own, but if backlogs get to we're worried that if backlogs get to the point where the legislature has nothing else, statewide, they've got nothing else to do to make significant changes. That's what we're, yeah.
So, but I heard you use specific language about certification for instructors that work in public schools.
Yeah.
Are there similar limits for private driving school instructors?
No. So independent private driving schools that are not, but they've just now, DMV has now just passed off everything from driver ed that they were associated with, including I-checks, to DPI.
Can we get some of that private school voucher money for private driving school?
That would be nice.
Just wondering.
I do want to add to what he said about the staffing at DPI. And so we've literally gone from a staff of about 6 to 7 people really down to 1 person. And so they essentially stripped everything that DPI was responsible for, including lifting up an online curriculum that we were using. We were actually one of the leading states on this, but now that has essentially been reduced to that individual making sure money goes out to the LEA, and there's almost nothing that DPI is able to do now. So there's one thing that I think we want legislators to pay attention to. It is what happens with drivers' ed, and all we need to do is to go back to the pandemic and think about what happened when kids weren't able to get driving instruction and how that impacted families in a very real way. And so, but now there's almost no support from DPI other than them sending money out to either LEAs or the driving schools that contract.
Thank you. Any other questions on driver's ed? All right. Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Good afternoon. I am here to talk a little bit about Naloxone, and Ms. Kelly Creech is not here with us today, who is ultimately the person who usually talks a little bit about this, but she has been deploying Naloxone in our schools today, literally, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just wanted to take a moment to provide you with an additional update. Wanted to let you know that we were able to have the Naloxone that we will have, that is literally today and yesterday been deployed to all of our sites through the Wake County Government Opioid Settlement Program. We do have this medication available in every one of our schools and pre-K centers, and all of those staff members are trained. It will also be available even in the Crossroads facilities. We have supplied our schools with the means to store this and make sure we can transport it, so we funded that component of this as well. The deployment was done by the Wake County Health and Human Services Department, School Health, and Wake County Health and Crisis Prevention Services, so we had a variety of people involved in that. Again, we deployed pretty much to all of our schools yesterday. School nurses and school new supervisors assisted in that deployment process. The Naloxone spray is stored in a black emergency medications bag that's located where the stock epinephrine is already located, so it's not a new location in a building. Teachers and staff are familiar with where those kinds of things would be located. Central Services locations, again, also received it, and it's going to be located in a AED cabinet at the Crossroads buildings, and also in a black emergency medications bag. But we're really excited to say that we have been successful in this deployment. I will say we have one exception, and that is Wake Early College of Health Sciences is on break, and they will get their Naloxone on Monday, the 24th. But we have had a successful deployment. It took us a few minutes to get all of our staff members trained across the entire district in every building, but really excited about the fact that we think that this is another line of defense on behalf of our for our students and our families. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Woodson. Do we know what the shelf life is on
It's a year. I'm glad you asked. And the opioid settlement program is committed to continuing to replenish as long as we need. I think they have a 10-year runway with this, so we have quite some time that we'll be able to make sure that we have sustainability with regards to that as well. So we have a structure in place now that we'll be able to continually train staff as we train them on other medications. It will just be a part of their regular training, and then they will also have the replenishment in a year's time.
Any questions about the opioid, not the opioid settlement, but Naloxone, which is funded through the proceeds of the opioid settlement? All right, very effective, Ms. Woodson.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, so at this time, without anything else on the agenda, we will go ahead and end our Student Achievement Committee. And as we do, you know where I'm going with this, we have to say goodbye to one of our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Stacy Wilson-Norman. I'm not going to duplicate things I've said before, but we're excited for you and the opportunities that await you. We wish we could have held on to you longer, but we're very appreciative of all the work that you've done while you were here and the seeds that you've planted that we expect will grow into wonderful things. So thank you very much.
You'll be very missed.
With that, we'll call the meeting adjourned.